On a rain-soaked night, a Korean Mafia boss found a threat on his doorstep that his entire empire couldn't fight. It wasn't a rival's warning. It was a newborn baby, a handwritten letter, and a woman who had already vanished into the storm. He would mobilize every soldier, every contact to find her, not for revenge, but because her letter held a devastating truth. She was dying, and this was her last act of love. The boss was Kim Jun, a man who built a legitimate empire from a shadowy past. The mother was Anya, a foreign student with no family, no money, and a secret she could no longer carry alone. Her letter was a confession and a plea: protect our daughter when I cannot. And with those words, a man who solved every problem with power faced one he could only solve with a choice. He had 48 hours before his world would collide with the truth of hers, and every minute she was missing was a minute he was failing her final wish. To understand the storm on his doorstep, you have to understand the calm he built. Kim Jun wasn't always a suit. 2 decades ago, he was a street enforcer for the Jumchenpa, his name whispered in the fish markets of Busan not out of respect, but fear. His turning point came not from a moral crisis, but a logistical one. He watched his boss lose a shipping contract worth millions because legitimate banks refused to touch their money. Jun saw the ceiling. So he built a new floor. He used his network not to break legs, but to broker deals. He laundered his reputation through real estate, construction, and finally, a venture capital firm so pristine it attracted investors from Geneva. The man who found the baby was a phantom of his former self. A CEO with a penthouse overlooking the Han River, whose most violent act in the past 5 years was firing a hedge fund manager over video call. This was the fortress Anya walked into 18 months before the rain, not through the front door, but through the service entrance. She was a 23-year-old scholarship student from Nigeria, studying biomedical engineering at Seoul National University. Her visa allowed 20 hours of work per week. Her mounting medical bills, for a persistent fatigue and joint pain doctors kept dismissing as stress, demanded more. A classmate knew a manager at the luxury service departments Jun's company owned. They needed weekend cleaning staff. No questions, cash in hand. It was in the hallway of the Victoria Suites, carrying a bucket of supplies, that she literally bumped into him. He was leaving a meeting with Japanese investors. She dropped a bottle of industrial cleaner. It didn't break. He stopped, picked it up, and handed it to her. Their fingers touched. He said, "Be careful, that stuff is corrosive." He noticed the textbooks under her arm, molecular biology. He asked, "You're a student?" She nodded, too nervous to speak. He looked at her uniform, then back at her face. "The brain doing that should not be cleaning toilets," he said. It wasn't pity. It was a statement of fact, the same way he'd assess an undervalued asset. He told his assistant to have her shifted to the building's administrative office for data entry. It paid better. It was daytime hours. This was the first secret. Their worlds were not meant to intersect. He was 42, she was 23. He was Korean corporate royalty with a murky past. She was a temporary visitor on a student visa, but the office was quiet. He would sometimes work late on Saturdays. She would be the only one there, inputting invoices. He brought her coffee once, placing it silently on her desk. She said thank you. A week later, she brought him a pastry from a Nigerian bakery she discovered, saying it was to repay the coffee. He ate it, asked what the spices were. They talked for 20 minutes about saffron and grain markets. It was a crack, then a fissure. The relationship that grew was a parallel life, conducted in stolen hours. A late dinner at an obscure noodle shop in Itaewon. A drive to the coast in his most anonymous car. Conversations that spanned from the ethics of gene editing to the brutal economics of his past. He was fascinated by the clarity of her mind. She was disarmed by his curiosity, a trait she never associated with men of his profile. He learned about her parents, both teachers, who had scraped together everything for her scholarship. She learned about his father, a fisherman who drowned when June was 10, and the debt his mother took from the wrong people to survive. Debt he eventually paid with his own youth. They were each other's anomaly, but anomalies are fragile. When she missed her period, the fragile thing shattered. She told him in his car, parked by the river. The silence was absolute. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" Not "What should we do?" A subtle, critical difference. She said she didn't know. He placed a hand on the steering wheel, looking at the water. "If you keep it," he said, his voice devoid of its usual command, "I will provide everything, a home, security, legitimacy. I can arrange things." He meant marriage. He meant using his power to reshape her immigration status, her future. It was the most generous, terrifying offer she had ever received. It felt like being swallowed by a benevolent wave. She asked for time. The next week, the fatigue became crushing. The joint pain turned sharp. She went to a public clinic, then a university hospital. The diagnosis was not stress. It was stage 3 systemic lupus erythematosus, an autoimmune disease where her own body was attacking her organs. The doctor laid out the facts. Aggressive treatment needed immediately, high-dose steroids, immunosuppressants. The pregnancy complicated everything. Some medications could harm the fetus. The disease itself increased the risk of preeclampsia, premature birth. Her body was now a battlefield, and the baby was in the crossfire. She didn't tell him about the diagnosis. She saw the future in a brutal, clear line. She would become a sick, dependent foreigner, the tragic secret of a powerful man. His world, which tolerated his mysterious past, would not tolerate her. His business, built on a precarious image of legitimacy, would see her as a vulnerability, a point of leverage for his enemies. And her child would be born into that shadow, a half-secret with a mother decaying in a gilded cage. The love she felt for him curdled into a cold, protective calculus. She began to pull away, citing finals, family troubles back home. He sensed the shift, attributed it to fear, to the overwhelming reality of the pregnancy. He doubled down on his plans. He quietly purchased a modest, secure apartment in a good neighborhood. He put it in a trust. He met with a discreet immigration lawyer. He was building a cage of safety, brick by meticulous brick. He saw it as a fortress. She saw it as a sentence. The baby came early in the 36th week. A little girl. She named her Grace, alone in the hospital, listing no father on the forms. She held that tiny, perfect life for 2 days, feeling the lupus flare burning through her veins, knowing the clock on her ability to care for her was already ticking. She had one card left to play. One terrible, desperate bet on the man she knew, not the suite of offices he occupied, but the core of him, the boy who paid his mother's debt. The man who handed her a bottle of cleaner and saw a student. She wrote the letter through tears that smudged the ink. She told him everything, the diagnosis, the prognosis, the fear. "I'm not leaving her because I do not love her," she wrote. "I am leaving her because I love her enough to give her to the only person I trust to fight for her future, not manage her mother's decline. You are her father, keep her safe, love her without my shadow, and please do not look for me. Let me have this one dignity, to spare her the memory of my fadding." She bundled Grace in the softest blanket she owned. She took a taxi across the city in the pouring rain. She placed the basket, the letter pinned to the blanket, under the covered entrance of his private mansion. She pressed the doorbell once. Then she vanished into the downpour, just as the internal security camera flickered to life, capturing only a blurred figure retreating into the night. Inside, the alert pinged on the phone of his head of security, a man named Park who had once been an enforcer at June's side. He saw the bundle. He saw the letter. He did not touch it. He called his boss. And Kim June, who had just won a brutal corporate takeover, looked at the live feed on his phone and felt the foundation of his meticulously built world crack open. He had 48 hours before a board meeting that would cement his final transition into pure legitimacy. He now had a newborn daughter on his doorstep and a dying woman somewhere in the city holding the other half of his heart. He had to choose which world to save. And as he knelt on the cold marble to pick up his child, he knew there was no choice at all. The manhunt began not with a shout, but with a whisper into his phone. "Find her," he said. "Use everyone, offer anything, but you bring her to me alive." The clock was ticking. And Anya, shivering in a cheap motel room miles away, was already starting to cough. The machinery of Kim June's life split into 2 parallel tracks. One track was soft, unfamiliar, and squeaking. It was the track of a newborn named Grace, installed in his penthouse with a night nurse he vetted for both credentials and discretion. He changed his first diaper at 3 a.m., his face a mask of intense concentration usually reserved for merger documents. The other track was the one he knew. It was silent, digital, and ruthless. Park, his security chief, became the conductor. He didn't call the police. He called a retired detective who now ran a private firm, a woman in the Immigration Bureau who owed June a favor from a past property dispute, and 3 different network managers from his old life, men who knew how to make questions get answered in neighborhoods where official forms held no power. The order was simple: find Anya Adebio, but the parameters were not. She was not a target. She was a protected asset, no intimidation, no traces, offer medical help, safety, anything, just find her. The first 24 hours yielded nothing. She had paid cash for the motel room under a false name, a skill she hadn't learned from him. She left her phone, wiped clean, in a subway station locker. The scholarship office at Seoul National reported she had formally withdrawn due to a family emergency 2 weeks prior. Her professors expressed concern but no knowledge. She was a ghost. June sat in his study, Grace sleeping in a bassinet beside his desk, and reread the letter for the 50th time. The smudges weren't just from rain, they were from tears. The phrase, "my fadding," cut deeper than any knife. He had built an empire on seeing angles, on predicting moves. He never saw this. His anger wasn't at her, it was at his own blindness, at the disease he couldn't buy off, at the pride that made her see his help as a cage. Park entered, his face grim. "Sir." "The hospital records from her diagnosis. We obtained them." June took the file. The clinical language was a horror story. Renal involvement, high risk of flare during pregnancy, prognosis with aggressive treatment, manageable, prognosis without it, rapid deterioration. The estimated cost of the biologic drug she needed annually was more than her scholarship was worth in total. She hadn't just hidden her sickness. She had hidden the math of her survival, a calculation that ended with her daughter on his doorstep. "She has no insurance here," Park said quietly, "and her student visa does not cover." June didn't let him finish. "Find the specialists, the best in the country for lupus. Have them on retainer now, name no price." Meanwhile, in a different Seoul, Anya was drowning in the echoes of her own plan. The cheap motel in the Mullidong district was damp. The cough was no longer just a tickle, it was a deep, rattling ache in her chest. The joint pain in her hands was so severe she struggled to open a bottle of water. She had enough cash for a week, maybe two. Her plan had been a straight line: leave Grace, disappear, and let the disease take her somewhere quiet and anonymous. A clean end. But the human heart is not a logical instrument. It is a compass, and hers was spinning wildly, pointing back to the penthouse, to the faint newborn smell still on her clothes, to the man whose face she saw every time she closed her eyes. She made a mistake. She used a public computer at a library to log into an old, abandoned email account when she thought no one would monitor. She typed a draft not to send, but to scream into the void. "I'm sorry, I'm so scared." I can feel it happening. I just wanted to hear her cry one more time. She saved it as a draft and left. She did not know that Park's digital sweep had flagged every online footprint associated with her name, past and present, and was spidering through every connected account. The draft email pinged on a monitor in a nondescript office 90 minutes later. The search radius tightened from the entire city to the districts south of the Han River. June's network shifted from broad questions to specific ones. Who had seen a young black woman, visibly unwell, buying over-the-counter painkillers? Did any clinic report a walk-in with lupus symptoms? The old networks proved more efficient than the new ones. A shopkeeper in Mangwon Market, whose stall protection fee was still quietly paid to a friend of a friend, remembered a woman matching her description buying ginger tea and bandages. She paid with cash. She was shivering in the heat. That was 2 days ago. June stood at his floor-to-ceiling window, Grace in his arms. For the first time in his adult life, he felt the paralyzing weight of a problem that could not be solved with money or force. He could buy the best doctors, but he had to find the patient. He could command loyalty, but he couldn't command a dying woman's trust. The board meeting he was supposed to chair in 24 hours was a distant, meaningless hum. He called his second-in-command at the venture firm. "You're chairing the meeting. I have a family emergency." The silence on the line was profound. Kim June never missed a board meeting. He never used the word family. The crack in his pristine facade did not go unnoticed. A rival conglomerate, the Seok Group, had been looking for leverage against June's aggressive expansion into their ports. Their corporate intelligence, almost as good as his own, caught whispers of unusual activity. A CEO suddenly absent, security resources diverted, rumors of a child. They didn't have the full picture, but they smelled blood in the water. A discreet inquiry was made to the Immigration Bureau contact, the same one June had used. The contact, facing pressure from a higher-up suddenly interested in visa irregularities, felt the balance of favors shift. He gave up no specifics, but he confirmed unusual attention on a particular foreign student case. This fragment of information landed on the desk of Kang Min-seok, the ruthless heir to the Seok Group. He saw not a tragedy, but an opportunity. If June was emotionally compromised, if he was hiding something, an illegitimate child, an immigration scandal, it was a weakness to be exploited, a stock price to be manipulated. Anya's body made the decision for her. On the 5th day, she woke up on the motel floor. She had fallen trying to get to the bathroom. The fever was a furnace. The world swam. The clean, quiet end she envisioned was being replaced by a slow, terrifying suffocation in a rented room. A primal instinct, stronger than pride or plan, took over. She needed help. She crawled to her bag, pulled out the cheap burner phone she'd bought, and with trembling fingers, dialed the only number she knew by heart in Korea that wasn't his. It was the community health clinic in Itaewon, where kind Nigerian-born nurse Kioma sometimes volunteered. She had gone there once for a flu shot. Kioma answered. Anya's voice was a whisper. I need help. I'm very sick. Lupus. I have no money. Kioma, hearing the desperation, gave her an address. Not the clinic, but a church basement where a free medical outreach was happening that evening. It was a risk. It was exposure, but it was oxygen. Park's team intercepted the call. They had been monitoring traffic around the clinic, a logical place for someone without resources to go. The burner phone signal was a fleeting bloom on a cell tower map, but it was enough. A location, a time. June was putting Grace down for a nap when Park entered the room without knocking, a rare breach of protocol. We have a location, tonight, Itaewon. She reached out to a clinic. June's entire body went still. Is she? She sounded weak, sir. But she's moving, we can be there. June looked from Park's urgent face to Grace's peaceful one. The collision of his two tracks was now imminent. Prepare the car, and call Dr. Kim, have him meet us at the house on standby, we bring her straight here. But as he said it, he knew it wouldn't be that simple. She had run for a reason. Showing up with a security detail at a church basement would look like a retrieval, not a rescue. It would confirm every fear she had. He had to go alone. It was the one thing his security protocol forbade. It was the only thing that had a chance of working. The sun set over Seoul. In the penthouse, a pediatrician examined a healthy, fussing Grace. In a church basement in Itaewon under fluorescent lights, a volunteer doctor listened to Anya's congested lungs and saw the butterfly rash on her face, a classic sign of a lupus flare. His expression was grave. You need a hospital. Now, this is beyond what we can do here. Anya shook her head, panic rising. I can't, I have no. There is a public hospital. They cannot turn you away in an emergency. He called for an ambulance. The decision was taken from her. As the volunteer helped her toward the door, a black sedan with opaque windows pulled up to the curb, blocking the ambulance bay. The church volunteers tensed. The door opened, and Kim June stepped out alone. He was wearing a simple black sweater, not a suit. He looked older, stripped of his corporate armor. His eyes found Anya, leaning heavily on a stranger, wrapped in a thin blanket. The world narrowed to the 10 feet of cracked pavement between them. He saw the fever in her eyes, the tremor in her hands. Every instinct told him to run to her to gather her up, but he remembered the letter, the dignity she asked for. He took one step forward, his hands open at his sides, a supplicant, not a king. Anya, he said, and her name was the only word he could manage. She stared at him, a storm of shame, relief, and terror crossing her face. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Then her knees buckled. June moved faster than anyone thought possible, crossing the distance and catching her before she hit the ground. She was shockingly light. He looked at the volunteer doctor, his voice low and commanding. My car now, we have a specialist waiting. The volunteers hesitated, looking at the ambulance. June's gaze swept over them. Please, he said, and the word, so foreign from his lips, broke the stalemate. He carried her to the sedan, placing her gently in the back seat. As the car pulled away, he held her hand, feeling the heat of her skin. She was barely conscious. Grace, she whispered. She is perfect, he said, his voice cracking, and she needs her mother. Anya closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. But as the car merged into traffic, another car, parked discreetly down the street, started its engine. Inside, a man with a camera lowered his long lens. He worked for a private investigator, one recently hired by the Seok Group. He had just captured 17 high-resolution photographs of Kim June carrying an unconscious black woman into his car. The collision wasn't over. It was just going public. The penthouse became a hospital suite and a war room. In one wing, the specialist, Dr. Kim, worked to stabilize Anya's crashing blood pressure and inflamed kidneys. In the study, Kim June stared at the first grainy photograph from the Seok Group's investigator, delivered via an anonymous email with a single question: "How much is your secret worth?" The clock on a discreet blackmail had started, but June was no longer a man who paid for silence. He was a father with a child in the next room and the child's mother fighting for her life down the hall. He called Park, traced the email, find the investigator, and get me everything on Kang Min-seok's current vulnerabilities, his debts, his mistresses, his off-book deals. The game was no longer corporate, it was personal. For 3 days, a fragile truce held. Anya drifted in and out of consciousness, hooked to IVs pumping steroids and immunosuppressants into her veins. When she was lucid, her first word was always grace. June would bring the baby, carefully supported by the nurse, and place her in the crook of Anya's arm. He would stand by the door, watching as Anya traced the baby's features with a trembling finger, tears streaming silently down her face. No grand speeches were made. He simply said, "You are both staying. That is not a negotiation." She was too weak to argue, but the world outside was not so still. The Seok Group, not receiving a response to their subtle probe, escalated. A financial reporter from a major newspaper received a tip: look into the sudden absence of VC King Kim June, ask about unusual expenditures and a foreign national. The reporter began digging. Park's counterintelligence team caught the digital breadcrumbs: searches into June's property holdings, inquiries at the Immigration Bureau. The walls were closing in. June made his first public move. He called a trusted ally at a broadcast network and arranged for a photographer to come to the penthouse. Not for an interview, for a single, controlled image. The next day, the business section ran a photo of Kim June in a sunlit living room, holding his infant daughter, looking not at the camera but at her. The caption read, "Kim June, chairman of Hanju Capital, on paternity leave, welcomes daughter Grace." It was a masterstroke. It acknowledged the child, framed it as a private joy, and stole the momentum from any salacious rumor. The stock price dipped briefly on the surprise, then stabilized. The board, though bewildered, publicly congratulated him. Kang Min-seok was furious. His blackmail material had been preemptively sanitized and released. He needed a bigger hammer. He found it in Anya's passport. His investigators, digging deeper into the foreign national, uncovered her student visa had expired. Her withdrawal from the university had voided its basis. Technically, she was now in the country illegally. This was no longer a gossip column scandal. This was a deportable offense. A call was made from Seok Group's legal office to a contact in the Ministry of Justice, highlighting a potential case of visa fraud that involved a high-profile businessman. The machinery of the state, slow but inexorable, began to turn. A file was opened. Anya Adebio was now a person of interest. June learned of it from his Immigration Bureau contact, who called in a panic. "They are asking questions, Mr. Kim, official questions. I cannot stop this." June saw the trap. If Anya was declared an illegal immigrant, she could be detained, separated from Grace, and ultimately deported back to Nigeria, where her medical treatment would be impossible. Her life depended on her staying in Korea. He assembled his legal team. The solution was straightforward in theory, monstrously complex in practice: marriage. A spousal visa would provide immediate legitimacy and a path to residency. But it couldn't look like a transaction. It had to withstand intense scrutiny from immigration officials, now primed by the Seok Group to look for fraud. They would interview them separately. They would examine the timeline. They would search for proof of a real relationship. And Anya was in a hospital bed, her recent history a map of concealment and flight. He went to her room. She was more alert, the color slowly returning to her cheeks. He laid it out plainly, sitting beside her bed. "The people who are after me have found a way to attack us. They are using your visa. The only way to secure your right to stay, to get the care you need, is for us to be married, in the eyes of the law." Anya looked at him, then at Grace sleeping in a bassinet beside her. "You are asking me to marry you, to save me." "I am telling you it is the only certain path," he corrected, his voice gentle but firm. "I am also asking you, but the reason does not matter, the result does." She was silent for a long time. "What if they don't believe it? What if they think it's a fake? Then we make it real," he said, taking her hand. "We have a child. We have a history, even if it was hidden. We have this." He gestured to the room, to the baby, to the space between them, thick with unsaid things and survival. "We give them a true story, just a different chapter than they expect." The decision was made. A quiet civil ceremony was arranged for the following week in the penthouse, with a judge who was a discreet friend. But the Seok group was not idle. Kang Min-seok, realizing the marriage ploy, played his final, cruelest card. He leaked the full dossier, photos of June carrying the ill woman, her name, her lapsed visa status, the timeline of her pregnancy, to a notorious online tabloid known for nationalist rhetoric. The story broke not as a business scandal, but as a cultural bombshell. Elite CEO harbors illegal immigrant, father of secret child, a question of national law and privilege. The comments section ignited with xenophobia and outrage. News vans gathered outside June's building. The Ministry of Justice, now under public pressure, announced a formal investigation into potential visa fraud and possible coercion. A summons arrived for Anya to appear for an immigration hearing. The war room was in chaos. Park reported threats to the building's security. The board was demanding an emergency meeting. June's phone rang with calls from furious investors, and in her bedroom, Anya saw the news on television, saw her own blurred image, and felt the walls of the gilded cage she feared slam down around her. The lupus flare, triggered by immense stress, began to return. Her temperature spiked. Dr. Kim adjusted her medications, his face lined with worry. She cannot go to a hearing. She cannot be detained. Her body will not survive it. June stood at the window, looking down at the media circus. His old life, the one built on control and shadows, had finally produced the monster that could devour his new one. He had tried to play by the new rules. Now, the old rules were the only ones left. Placed a call to a number he hadn't dialed in 7 years. It rang twice before a voice, rough with sleep and cigarettes, answered. "Yeah, Sang-chul, it's June, I need a favor." A long pause. "You dissolved the partnership, you went legit. I'm calling it in, the one from the docks in Busan." Another pause. The debt was from a night when June had taken a knife meant for Sang-chul's younger brother. "Name it. I need a distraction, tonight." At the Ministry of Justice Records Annex in Seocho. A fire alarm, a broken water main, something that requires a full evacuation and a lockdown of the building for 24 hours. That's a big ask. The file for Anya Adebio will be in the Immigration Prosecution Wing, 4th floor. I need it to go missing before the hearing tomorrow. Sang-chul whistled softly. "You're burning your bridges back to this side, Juna. The bridge is already on fire. I'm just steering the ship." The call ended. That night at 2:17 a.m., a faulty electrical panel in the basement of the Justice Annex shorted out, triggering a cascade of fire alarms and sprinklers. The building was evacuated. Water damage was extensive. Critical digital servers were powered down as a precaution. When officials returned in the morning, chaos reigned, and a specific physical file, requested for the day's hearing, was noted as temporarily misplaced, likely damaged. Hearing was postponed indefinitely due to unavoidable administrative circumstances. Kang Min-seok, watching the news report of the flood, knew it was no accident. He knew he had pushed June back into the darkness, and a man with nothing left to lose in the light is the most dangerous kind in the shadows. He had won a battle, but he had unleashed something he could not control. The next move was June's, and as the sun rose, June was already making it. He wasn't defending anymore. He was bringing the storm to their doorstep. Kim June's war was not fought in boardrooms or on spreadsheets. It was fought in the quiet hours, with information as his artillery. The dossier Park had compiled on Kang Min-seok was not about business rivals. It was about a man with a gambling addiction hidden behind offshore accounts. A man who had pressured a junior associate into an affair, then paid her silence with a promotion she didn't deserve. A man whose company's flagship eco-friendly development in Incheon was built on illegally dumped construction waste, covered up by falsified soil reports. June did not leak this to the press. He sent it in neatly organized packets to 3 places: the National Tax Service, the Ministry of Environment, and the Seok Group's own board of directors, with a note from a concerned stakeholder. He then called Kang Min-seok directly. The phone rang 4 times before it was answered. "You flooded a government building," Kang said, his voice tight. "I returned a favor," June replied, his tone conversational. "Your investigators are very good, but you made one mistake. You thought my family was my weakness. They are my only strength, and for them I have no lines I will not cross. The packages you will receive today are a ceasefire. Push me again, and the next delivery goes to every major news outlet simultaneously. Your father's legacy will be a footnote about toxic waste and hush money." The line was silent for a long moment, then it went dead. The siege was over. But winning a war is not the same as securing a peace. The public scandal, though fatting without the Siok group's fuel, had left a stain. The immigration case, while delayed, was still a specter. Dr. Kim presented a new, sobering prognosis. Anya's body had responded to the aggressive treatment, but the flare had caused minor, permanent damage to her kidneys. She would need lifelong management. She would likely face future flares. She could live a full life, but it would be a life intertwined with medical vigilance. It was the future she had run from, but now she was not facing it alone. The quiet civil wedding took place a week later. The judge came. Park and the nurse were the witnesses. Anya wore a simple cream dress, sitting in a chair, too weak to stand for long. June knelt beside her to exchange rings. When the judge pronounced them married, Anya looked at June, and for the first time since he'd carried her from the church basement, she smiled. It was small, weary, but real. "For the paperwork," she whispered. He shook his head, his own eyes bright. "For us," he said. With the marriage certificate, his top-tier legal team swung into action. They filed for a spousal visa, attaching volumes of documentation, photos from their early dinners, discreetly provided by Park's security archives, testimony from the building manager at Victoria Suites about their relationship, a heartfelt statement from June, and a powerful medical affidavit from Dr. Kim outlining the life-threatening consequences of deportation. They framed the entire narrative not as a scandal, but as a private love story caught in a public storm, a CEO protecting his ill wife and newborn child. The immigration hearing, when it was finally rescheduled, was a formality. The officer, reviewing the overwhelming evidence of a bona fide relationship and humanitarian need, approved the application. Anya Adebio became Anya Kim. The cage she feared had transformed, door open, into a home. June's next move surprised his entire board. He announced he was stepping back from an active, day-to-day role at Hanju Capital, transitioning to chairman emeritus. He cited a desire to focus on his family and new philanthropic ventures. The business world was stunned. The man who had built an empire from nothing was walking away at the height of his power, but June was not retiring. He was repurposing. He established the Grace Foundation, initially funded with a staggering personal donation. Its mandate was twofold: funding research for autoimmune diseases, specifically lupus, and providing support and legal aid for migrant mothers and children in Korea. He installed Anya as the founding director, a role that gave her purpose, authority, and a platform built on her own lived experience. The first major grant went to Seoul National University's immunology department, to the very professors who had once taught her. Life in its new shape was not a fairy tale. It was early mornings with baby Grace, who had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn calm. It was managing Anya's medication schedules, good days and bad days. It was learning to be a partner, not a protector, a patient listening to another's pain, not a fixer issuing a solution. Anya, with her strength returning, began to reclaim herself. She started a blog under her own name, The Lupus Diaries, writing with searing honesty about illness, fear, motherhood, and finding an unexpected love. It went viral. She became a voice, not a secret. One evening, a year after the night on the doorstep, they were in the garden of a new, quieter home. Grace was toddling after fireflies. Anya, watching her, said quietly, "I thought leaving her was the last good thing I would ever do." June took her hand. It was the first brave thing in a story that wasn't finished. And then came the final, surprising detail. It arrived in a plain envelope postmarked from Nigeria. Inside was a letter from Anya's father, a man she had not seen in 4 years. He wrote that he had seen her picture in an online article about the Grace Foundation. He had read her blog. He said he was proud of her. He said her mother was ill and that he was sorry for the silence, for the pressure they had put on her to come home and abandon her unseemly pregnancy. He asked for nothing. He just said he was proud. Anya cried for 2 hours, clutching the letter. It was a thread to a past she thought was severed, a forgiveness she didn't know she needed. June asked if she wanted to go home to visit. She looked at Grace, at her new life, at the man beside her. "This is home," she said, "but maybe we can build a bridge." The story that began with a desperate act in the rain ended not with a dramatic victory, but with a quiet, sustained choice. Kim June, the former enforcer, found his legacy not in skyscrapers, but in a foundation named for his daughter. Anya Adebio, the student who thought she was dying, found a life larger than she ever imagined. And Grace, the baby on the doorstep, grew up knowing she was the anchor around which two broken worlds rebuilt themselves into something whole. The letter that started it all was framed, not in June's office, but in their living room beside Grace's first ultrasound picture. A reminder that sometimes the end of one story is just the complicated, beautiful beginning of another. And as the lights of soul twinkled beyond their garden, a family, forged in crisis and chosen in hope, finally found their quiet. So what do we make of a story that begins with an ending? The night Anya left her daughter, she believed she was writing a final period. She was actually writing a semicolon. The story was pausing, ready to continue in a direction she never could have plotted. This tale, born from desperation on a rainy doorstep, challenges the simple labels we love to use. Is it a crime story, a love story, a medical drama? It is the messier, truer thing, a human story. It asks what happens when the person who seems to have all the power meets a problem that cannot be bought or intimidated. And what happens when the person who feels utterly powerless discovers the one lever she can pull is the human heart of a king. The story of Kim, June, and Anya is not a blueprint. It is a testament to the fact that our pasts, no matter how shadowed or painful, are not prisons. They are raw materials. June's brutal history gave him the network and the ruthless clarity to protect his family when the polished world turned against them. Anya's illness and fear gave her the desperate courage to make an impossible choice, which became the catalyst for a transformation she could not see. Their greatest weaknesses, in the crucible of crisis, became strange and specific strengths. It reminds us that family is not just who you are born to, but who you choose to fight for, who you choose to build a life with, piece by fragile piece. This narrative also holds a mirror to the systems around them: immigration, healthcare, corporate warfare, and shows how easily a human life can become a pawn in a larger game. But it also shows that individual action, stubborn and focused, can bend those systems. A man can step back from an empire to build a foundation. A woman can turn her diagnosis into a dialogue that helps thousands. A child, the quiet center of the storm, can grow up as the living proof that love is an action, a choice made every single day. Perhaps the lingering question this story leaves us with is not about them, but about us. What are the doorsteps in our own lives? What are the problems we think can only be solved with the tools we already know: money, silence, withdrawal? And what might happen if we dared to use a different, more vulnerable tool? If we asked for help instead of vanishing? If we offered sanctuary instead of a solution? The most powerful move Kim June ever made was not a hostile takeover. It was kneeling on a marble floor to pick up a child. The bravest thing Anya ever did was not leaving, but later, in a church basement, finally reaching out. Their story is now part of a larger tapestry, one woven with countless other stories of found families, of unexpected redemption, of love that arrives not on schedule, but exactly when it is needed most. It's a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary chapters begin in the most ordinary, heartbreaking moments. A bench outside an elevator, a conversation about fish, a basket left in the rain. Thank you for listening to this story, crafted with care for every moment of fear, hope, and quiet triumph. If this tale resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own resilience or of someone in your life, we'd be honored to hear about it in the comments below. Share your thoughts, your stories, and if you know someone who needs to hear a story about second chances and fierce, protective love, please pass this along. Help us grow this community of storytellers and listeners. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next journey into the heart of what makes us human. Until next time.